Okay guys, I want to give you a breakdown on my 58 Chevy Apache. This is a cool truck. It's all two-stroke themed. There's so many things about this, so many different angles, and there's a lot of things to talk about. So when I first started thinking about this truck, I thought about the old vintage dirt bikes, the old metal tank bikes that were, in the 70s. The two strokes were always fun. They made a ton of power. They sounded super cool. So when I seen this truck, all I could see was a metal tank. I mean, looking at the truck, it looks like a metal tank on an old motorcycle. So when I seen it, it just seemed to make sense to me that this is something that would be cool to make a motorcycle hauler out of and kind of pay homage to the old dirt bike racers back in the 70s, say like Malcolm Smith and Steve McQueen and a lot of them old guys that were in 1970. They were racing these old Husqvarnas across the desert for 1,000 miles, 500 miles at a time. Back then, it was just really, it was pretty amazing to think that they would take off and we didn't know if they were gonna make it back or not. Yeah, I think it came to me, me and Merlin, when we actually were thinking about this truck. We were in Montana, and it came to us that it would be appropriate to put a two-stroke diesel engine in it so we could keep it all two-stroke themed. Now there's pros and cons to that thing, you know what I mean? Because this is a 6V53 Detroit. They don't make a ton of horsepower. They're very reliable. They can run on anything. And a lot of these old motors in these trucks, they ran them in like Army tanks in World War II, Vietnam had them. They ran them in everything, boats, tanks, pumps, you name it, they ran these motors in it. These old Detroits were kind of known for runaways. Anytime that any oil from the crankcase or anything gets into the internals of the motor, it'll run away past the governor. But what happens is these old motors used to leak, and when they would leak into the cylinders and they would create a vacuum, and these old two-strokes will run off anything. So what would happen is it'd pull the antifreeze out of it, it'd pull the engine oil out of it, and it would run away. And a lot of guys fire them up, and it's sitting there loping and idling, and pretty soon it just, whoa, it takes off, and basically they call it a runaway. And a lot of these came factory with a guillotine on them, so you could actually just shut the air off to them immediately. But if you have no air shut off, it could run away. So the Detroit diesel really wasn't like a torque monster, it was more RPM. If you've ever seen like any of the old war movies like Vietnam, a lot of these guys were running these Detroits in there, and they were in Army tanks, and they were just wide open, rah, and they're just screaming all day long. So my grandpa was an old truck driver, and every once in a while he would be in a truck that had a Detroit in it. And their theory back then was the only way to really drive a Detroit was wake up in the morning, slam your hand in the door so you're good and pissed off when you get ready to get started. So you just hold your foot on the floor and you just jam gears all day long in it, because they're bulletproof. You could literally hold them to the floor as long as you're not overheating them and run them all day long. And that's kind of what they were designed for. So they're a two-stroke system, meaning that when the cylinder comes down, at the bottom of the block in the crankcase, there's a scavenger ports that suck the air in. And these are all supercharged, not for horsepower. They're supercharged as a compressor. So what the supercharger does is build air pressure to shove into the cylinder. The cylinder comes up, injector fires, boom. Every time it comes up, it fires. The Detroits are very distinguished on the sound, and I honestly really, really love the sound of a Detroit V8. I did a video in Canada one time with a girl. I met her and her dad, and they were huge Detroit fans. They love Detroit diesels. And let me tell you, this girl could shift a cracker box truck like you can't believe. It had like a 13 speed in it with an H pattern. And I mean, she could run this thing down the road like you've never seen before. It was pretty awesome. This thing still doesn't make enough horsepower to really get the turbos to light up and really work real hard, but there's a good possibility that I've been talking to the guys over at Industrial Injection, and we're thinking about building maybe a common rail 6.7 to put in this thing that'll actually make a lot of torque, get it down the road, and I'll be able to drive this thing down the highway. Right now, it's a little bit underpowered. You know, this motor's old. I drug it out of a junkyard. I mean, we didn't change a seal on it. It's leaking, and these old Detroits, you know, like the old guy said, if there's no oil under them, there's no oil in them, and that's a fact. Okay, so let's get under the hood on this thing. Obviously, we had to cut the top of the hood out because the turbos come through it, right? Down inside of here is just a mess if you don't know what you're looking at. So on this side of the motor over here, you've got 3 exhaust ports, okay? Which in return is coming over here and feeding these turbos to spool. It's a crisscross. We crossed it over when we built this thing just to make it confusing. And if you ever watch this episode on TV, you'll see it probably without the front clip on it, so you can actually see what the motor looks like. But it's a V6. I don't know if you can really see what it looks like down in there, but it's an old Detroit. We got an icebox intercooler and radiator combination sitting here that they built custom for this truck, which actually turned out pretty good. It's, you know, them guys build a lot of industrial stuff for like tractors and all kinds of stuff. So they built us this intercooler radiator combination. But I mean, just so you can kind of see what it looks like, you can see that it's very confusing in here, but it looks cool. Hey guys, come with me real quick. I want to show you something. Listen, if you guys got a diesel truck and you want to make it run right, you want to keep your fuel clean, and you want to keep injectors in your truck, listen, use the MAX MPG. This stuff is great. If you just take and you fill a little bit in, right there, you fill it up to the top. This right here treats about 24 gallons of fuel, but me, I like to run a couple of them in there. These old diesels like it. They sit around a long time. They get condensation inside the fuel. And this old dirty tanks in this thing, guess what? This will help your injectors. It'll keep your diesel alive. Use MAX MPG.